Should it stay or should it go? Welcome back to another episode of Fridays with the Fiddle Fig. I'm John Selby with the Selby team, and this is always a debate between buyers and sellers. What stays, what goes, and here I am. Today, I'm going to point out what are common things that stay, what are common things that go, and how do we decide? So a few obvious things that stay are personal items, couches, beds, dressers, all that kind of stuff. So those are pretty much, common things. It's written in the contract. Those are taken with you when you sell. And you're expected to bring those with you when you buy. Same thing with like art, things like that. A few obvious things that are going to stay with the sale of a house are things that are affixed to the floors or the walls, such as cabinets in your kitchen, built-ins, bathtubs, sinks, showers, stuff like that. Those are obvious things that stay with the house. Or anything that's written into the contract. So if a buyer writes in that they want X, Y, and Z items, those items would stay with the house also. So a few items that are maybe not as clear, and I always tend to kind of get these questions from buyers and sellers, are things that are quote-unquote affixed to the wall, but they're not permanently affixed to the wall. So that would include TVs and TV mounts. Although they're technically affixed to the wall, those are items that would go with a seller. Art, like I mentioned earlier, I guess I kind of mentioned in the obvious section, but it's not all that obvious, but things that are hung on the walls, such as art. I've gotten this question before, but I've had clients who have had just mirrors hung in the bathroom. And technically that's something that the seller could take with them. And in that situation, I actually recommend that they just replace it before we actually go on the market so that there's no confusion in that regard. And then a couple other things that are not quite as obvious. There are like shelving. And a lot of people, especially in California, put shelving in and then they add earthquake straps to it. So if anything was to happen, it doesn't fall over. That's actually technically an item that goes because the earthquake strap is a safety item. Now if they had shelving that they had bolted to the wall, that's another story. That would actually have to stay with the property. A couple other things that are sometimes confusing with whether they stay or whether they go. Curtains or curtain rods. So technically the buyer or the seller is allowed to take the curtains from a property, but they're not allowed to take the curtain rods and fixtures for the property. I always tend to clarify this. If a seller is adamant that they want their curtains, I'll actually write it in the contract just so that there's no confusion. Window air conditioning units, those are technically things that can be taken with the seller because they're just set in the window and they're not actually fixed, but like a mini split system, or if they were to actually build it into the wall, that would then have to stay with the property. So that's an item that's kind of both ways depending on how you have it set up. And another item that, although it seems obvious to some of us, it isn't always that obvious, are like custom chandeliers, fans, things like that. Those are technically permanently affixed and they are required to stay. If a seller says that they love their fans a lot or they love their chandelier, I always recommend that we take it out of the property before we list it and before we take photos. But if it's like a centerpiece for the house, we may leave it in there and then make it very clear on the contract that that item does not convey with the property. So hopefully this episode helps you clarify a few things when you're prepping your house for the market, what you can expect to take, what you should prep and maybe take off the walls or off, disassemble them before listing it, and what you have to leave with the property. If you ever have any other questions, always feel free to reach out. And if you work with the Selby team, we're going to go through your house with you and help point out items that are going to stay, that are going to go, or that are kind of negotiable. So that's part of our service. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Fridays with the Fiddle Fig. Check back soon for another great episode.